Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. The change, some of us can't take change, and I'm one of those. So I don't have a gavel, I don't have an iPad, I don't have a computer, but we're going to make it through tonight. All right. So I now call this special meeting to order of Goose Creek CISD Board of Trustees for our budget workshop. And it is now 6:18. Mr. Campisi, was the meeting properly posted?
Yes, it was.
And do we have a quorum?
We do.
Thank you. All right, Dr. O'Brien? Sorry, no. We have any citizen participation?
No, I mean.
Any citizen? No. Okay, thank you. All right, the discussion items. Dr. O'Brien, I'm gonna turn it over to you and your famous team.
Yes, ma'am. I will call up that team. Oh, they're here. Hello. I'm going to turn it right over to you, the experts at the end of the table.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. So this is our first workshop formation that we have had in the workshop format for this budget year, 25-26. And we welcome everybody. I know some of you had to rush over here from a former meeting, so we appreciate you getting here, so thank you. So tonight we're going to talk, of course, about some legislative bills that we're worried or concerned about, watching, following. Of course, not a lot has happened actually yet, but we are following things, and things are going to start heating up soon. Then we're going to get into the thick of the budget reduction considerations, and then we'll talk about the calendar and next steps. All right, so I have been following a couple of items. One is Senate Bill 2, and it is actually I received a summary, and it was from another school district, and the Senate Bill 2 is actually the voucher bill. Now, there was a side-by-side that we showed the voucher bill next to the Senate bill, and how the voucher bill was going to give $10,000 per student, and the basic allotment was going to increase to the $6,500. Well, I have since learned that that's the basic allotment increase. I can't find where they got that number, so that number is not it's not a number that I saw published in the bill. So I'm going to see and find out, because I remember when Senator Creighton came out and said that last session they created a school finance bill, and that bill was not passed, and we know it didn't pass because the voucher was included with it. Well, he since said that public school finance increases that ship its sail. So I remember when he said that early on in the session, actually before the session even started. So he may be true to his word, but as far as that's concerned, but at this juncture, it is just strictly the voucher bill, and it does not call for an increase in basic allotment. The House bill alternatively does. Now, back on the Senate Bill 2 and school finance, but there was talk and there was testimony that was given by Commissioner Morath last session that bandied around the increase in basic allotment of about $340, $350, which is what that $6,500 would equate to approximately. So I don't know if some of that got included in there, but nonetheless, the House Bill 2 school finance is definitely showing an increase in basic allotment to $6,380. And it also does calls for an increase of the compensation going to teachers, nurses, and librarians and non-administrative staff, increasing from 30% to 40%. They were supposed to have voted on that bill on the 18th, but it was delayed, so I'm still waiting to figure out where they are on that, but I know that they are moving forward on the House side. Just to recap what we did last year, again, all the hard work that we did for the last couple of years, and especially last year, reducing the budget by $13 million, we were able to give a general pay increase of 4%. I'll turn it over to Dr. Bollinger.
Okay, and just as a recap, and we presented in more depth at the last board meeting about the budget reduction committee, but we had a district-wide committee where we received input from various departments And during that meeting, as a reminder, we reviewed cuts that we've made so far as a district over the last 2 years. And then we also developed action plans and strategies for where we're at right now, moving forward on what the reduction amount is. And so based off of the feedback from the committee and also from Executive Council, recommendations were presented to the board. And so that was really our first stab at strategies to reduce the budget where we need to be. The next 2 slides cover really just sort of a bird's eye view of how we're looking at the budget reduction process for this year. And so there's 4 steps or 4 options to consider. So the first option is based off of the recommendations from the committee, which we're going to go back over here
Before
in
you
a
go
few
over
minutes.
this one, can you explain why it changed so significantly between the one I got Friday and the one I got just now?
Sure. In which regard?
The numbers.
The 55 positions?
Both numbers.
Yeah. So we are going to go through each item line by line, and we can talk about what's been removed and what's been adjusted. And so, but just to give you the short answer is on Friday, Executive Council met and reviewed that list in detail, pulling up contracts, pulling up dollar amounts. And so there was some course correction.
Okay, good.
Based off what we had.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you.
Yep. So from the committee, if we were to adopt the items that you're going to see here in a little bit, then in addition to some of the program adjustments and policy adjustments, it would equate to 48 positions that would also be reduced. So you'll see that here in a little bit. And with the reduction of all those recommendations, we're still not where we need to be dollar-wise. And so here in a minute, Ms. Clark is going to show the dollars attached to the strategies. And so, with those recommendations, if the board were to say, yes, let's move forward on all of those, we would still be 55 additional positions short. And so that would get us to a balanced budget. So we looked over the last 5 years at just staffing and how many full-time employees we've had in the district. And right now we're sitting at 302 fewer positions than we had 2 years ago during 22-23. So there's been quite dramatic cuts. And if you go back 5 years, right when COVID hit, we're 18 fewer positions than we were at that point. So once COVID hit, there was some funding that was added. Some of that funding was tied to increase in positions due to learning loss. And so over the last few years, many districts, including Goose Creek, has had to scale that back down due to lack of funding. Another consideration, at the next board meeting on April 7th, we are going to present as part of the budget update the compensation package. And so that'll be presented. We met with TASB and they've given us their data that we always share with the board. And so one consideration is adjusting the pay raise recommendations. So Bridget has built in a holder of 2%, what a 2% raise would look like. Of course, that's up to the board to decide, hey, do we want to do more than that, less than that, or 2%? But another option is if you were to reduce or adjust that pay raise recommendation, that would allow for more flexibility on the items that we're going to recommend. We're not suggesting that you do that. We're just saying that would be an option to make that adjustment. Another strategy, which is we're a little nervous in saying this just because we don't know how things are going to go in legislation, but actually this came from our TASB consultant, is just to slow play compensation a little bit, because as legislation puts out information, there may be a pay increase included, and that would be information that would be good for the board before they jump to a raise. But we do know that some districts have already announced their raise, not many at this point. But we know there's a downside with the pay increase, because we use the compensation is a big draw for recruitment and for retention. And so if we're taking too long in announcing what pay is going to look like for next year, that can negatively impact employees.
Concerning that, I don't know if this is a legal question or not that we may have to dig information about, but should we approve the 2% raise and then the legislators put the money in for raise and say it has to be used for raises? Is that going to be on top of the 2% we already did? Will we be able to cover the 2% with what they give us? That's about it.
That's verbiage we would have to work on.
Yeah.
But Is the
mean,
board's
or would
wishes
that
to go ahead
be-
and put the placeholder in now?
Would that be the, what would determine that would be the way we would word it? I don't want to put pursuing upon, but
Right.
if they're going to give us enough money to do that, let's let them do it. But if they're not, then we got to stay competitive.
The idea is there's two different thoughts on that. One is there's some resistance to give per pupil funding, but not as much resistance to give teacher increases. Then the board would be left with the decision to handle all non-teacher positions rather than the money supported by our legislators. So it's still up in the air. There's two versions. They're bouncing them back and forth before a final one will be voted on, as y'all know.
Well, a quick question, Ms. Clement. One of the things, Dr. O'Brien, that they had mentioned that it will be tied to performance and not as just across the board. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. And we do have a program already in place called Teacher Incentive Allotment that is tied to performance as well. So it may be an enhanced version of that. It may be something totally separate and apart from that. We don't know as of yet. We know that the Teacher Incentive Allotment originally published has been minimized and reduced, we believe, as a cost-effective measure by the TEA. So we're still pending and waiting on that to be endorsed or further supported in their state budget.
And I'll say also, just for our timeline, is on April 7th, we would present compensation options on what the 2% increase would look like financially, as well as some other options. But that doesn't go to the board for a vote until May. And so there is some time to discuss and think about what that would look like. And then some of the feedback that we received was the only, back to your question, Mr. Clem, is that if the board were to jump out and approve a raise early, that probably would be no issue, except for some, and I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what was shared with us, is that there could be legislation that says that the raise, the teacher increase that's added is on top of what's already been adopted. And so depending on how that's worded, the language that could come back to hurt what was previously approved. So that's why the recommendation was from TASB was just to don't rush out there. And the recommendation was just not to rush out and make that decision quite yet.
He did say that was rare, though. He didn't expect that to happen, but stranger things have happened in our legislature, so you just never know. But again, we may not be able to wait, that long because we don't know when these bills are actually going to get signed into law. And you have to pass a budget based on current law, which is what we're doing. We're not really, we have hypotheticals that have what we could receive, which we know is probably not going to work out exactly that way. That's why they're hypotheticals and they're illustrations only. But, because we have to publish, we're going to adopt the entire budget on the 16th, which means we have to publish like that right at the beginning of June. So whatever is in place at the beginning of June that we know, which is current law, is what we have to go with. So if we get anything else beyond that, there are ways that you can, even if they say it's on top of the amount that you already may have adopted, there are ways that you can make up the difference. So on the budget reduction, what we're looking at, and this is kind of the bird's eye view that we want to paint, is that if we were to reduce, the programs and policy recommendations plus the positions, it would be a reduction 48 positions, which doesn't get us where we need to be. So if we were to add 55 more positions in reduction, that's a total of 103 positions. And so that's what it would take to balance the budget is 103 positions. So to put that in perspective, over the last 2 years, as I stated, we've reduced 302 positions. That's about 7.5% of our staff. So as far as numbers go, we've reduced our staff in the last 2 years about 7.5%. So to add 100 more positions, realistically it's doable, but it would be a huge stretch. And so it would be very, very difficult. We would be very strategic in those positions. Of course, we would always use the attrition model at this point. So based off resignations, we wouldn't fill certain positions, but it is just being very transparent, it would be a very difficult task to further reduce. That would get us to about the 10%
mark, which is a lot of reductions. And so it's been challenging this year to come up with a viable plan. Last resort option is also to dip into the fund balance, but Ms. Clark's going to show, if we continue to do that, there's going to be a hazard down the road on that too. And so we want that to be a last resort option. Okay, so now Ms. Clark's going to walk through line by line what the committee and what her teams have been working on regarding the reduction process.
Okay, so I laid this out a little differently based on comments from you, Mr. Clem, just to see kind of where we are and how we derived at our revenue numbers, and then the other adjustments that get us to our beginning deficit number. So we took our revenue number and we adjusted it by the reduced tax rate, which was about $1.5 million. And then we also had a decrease in ADA, and the net decrease for that is about $640,000. And then on the bright side, we had some increased investment earnings of $2.5 million, so that gave us an adjusted revenue number of about $253,149. So that's our starting revenue number, and then our quote-unquote savings accounts we're transferring in from $1 million from workers' comp, and then 12.484 from capital projects fund. And then we also had a school consolidation that gave us a savings amount of $2.195 million. And then unadjusted expenditures for the year is about $266 million. And then we have to make adjustments to that. We have increases in health insurance to offset the increases in premiums from employees that we contributed. We have increases in liability insurance, property, vehicle, and also added facilities, and that's pretty much across the board. As we all know, insurance has just been increasing. It's about $235,000. Then we have child care at Lamar. It's going to be an increase of about $215,000. And pre-K transportation, an increase of $381,000 to change those start times. And then the technology maintenance contract increases. These are mandatory. Our maintenance costs every year for these contracts, and we have an increase of $50,000. And then we just factored in a 2% general pay increase for employees. That comes to a price tag of about $4.2 million, which gives us a total beginning deficit of just over $6 million on line 17 there.
Okay, so line 16 is everybody.
That is a general pay increase for all employees.
Everybody.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The child care at Lamar is build out and moving.
It is increasing classrooms from 8 to 16.
So more staff.
The more staff, and yes, sir.
And benefits, et cetera.
Right, and this number could change based on
sure.
In the final enrollment and all that. So these are just projections right now.
About how many paid enrollments do we have there?
Paid
right now.
Right now.
We only have
the 70 students that are enrolled, only 12 are students. So the rest
and so we could increase that because we have more rooms?
Yes, actually I have the proposal to give to Dr. Bryant right now on the proposed rate.
Okay, so that number could definitely go down. All right, but the back to my question, the 215, is that just staff and benefits, or are we including?
It's everything. It's
okay. All right.
Startup costs, new classrooms.
And the health insurance increase. That's what we did this year to offset premiums, and we're going to expect the same exact thing.
Correct, because our policy goes through December.
So we're good through December. Then we'll be playing this insurance game again.
We'll find out when we go out for bid and get our bids back and everything, what the number's going to look like. So there may be a budget amendment for that if there's an increased cost again, but at this point, we just don't know.
Okay,
because we're going to market.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was going to be my question, especially on the child care at Lamar. Is that a one-time, or is that going to be recurring in the next budget?
It's going to be recurring for the most part. There may be some of it that's startup supplies and, desks and that sort of thing, but for the most part, it is going to be recurring. Yes, that's true, because they're the little bitty ones. Yes. And then line 7 and 8, the transfers in, of course, those are one-time money. Those
Right.
are out of our savings account. The school consolidation will be.
Dr. Price is sitting down, good. Have we considered decreasing our white fleet to save on liability insurance, all that stuff? Is there any way we've looked into that?
That's actually on the next slide.
Okay, sorry, I got ahead.
Oh, no problem. All right, so I carried over that beginning budget deficit here on line 17. You can see it again, 6062. And then I'll just start going down the list here. Because the bond is winding down, our 2019 bond is winding down, we just have, just a few little loose ends that will have to be tied up. And so we're able to have reduced those positions by 3, and that saves us $225,000. Just the net decrease of all adjustments since we ran the snapshot, which was incorporated into the budget last year, just the net of all the adjustments coming in and leaving equated to about $93,000. Line 21 there, the elimination of the HR early retirement incentive and the sign-on bonus is about $70,000. I closed a payroll coordinator about $72,000. There's going to be some underutilized software elimination or software that we're not using anymore, so that's going to save us about $100,000. We're doing a travel reduction of about 10% district-wide, saving us about $75,000. Here on line 25 is the white fleet policy. The policy has been that we allow anybody or any employees under 30 miles that live within a 30-mile radius to take home a maintenance or white fleet vehicle. We're working on reducing that number and revising the policy, but we're still working on finalizing that policy, but we think we're going to be able to get savings of that amount. And it might change a little bit, but somewhere around there we think we'll be able to get. Then line 26 is restructuring custodial staffing at smaller facilities. Did you want to speak on that one, Matt?
So right now we have a pretty blanket staffing for custodians at all elementaries, but some of the elementaries have smaller square footage than others. And so if there's a opportunity at the smaller sized campuses, not necessarily enrollment, but just square footage, the smaller, there would be a savings of taking one custodian position away from those smaller custodians. This was actually a recommendation a few years ago when we did a staffing study with TASB, is to look at that in more depth. And so we feel like in working with Dr. Price's team, this would be very feasible to do. Some of these, you want to talk about number 27?
Yes, number 27 is we had a meeting with food service and Dr. Price and operations and Aramark last week. And we had a discussion around being able to transition some of our custodians who are currently in general fund to the food service fund, which serves 2 purposes. It's helping us, reduce our general fund costs, and it also helps us spend down our food service fund balance because we're required to do so because we have such large reserves at this time, which is a good problem to have. But because we have custodians that are dedicated to, the cafeteria and that sort of thing, we're able to transition some of those positions, and also a few maintenance as well, pest control and a couple of others. I'm sorry? Oh, I think there's some refrigeration, but pest control for sure, and then there's a couple of others. And then most of it, though, is the custodians. I don't know about that. Yeah, so yeah. So we didn't actually have to eliminate any per se. We just, redirected them to a different fund. So that's helping us in multiple ways.
I'm going to interrupt here and just say, this is some really good thinking and digging and maybe good policy to have in place, even if we ever live high on the hog again.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we're digging deep.
Pay people from where they're doing their work.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
All right.
So we were happy to be able to put that one in, and then I'll let you speak on this one.
Sure, and we mentioned this at the last board meeting, but we talked about maybe for smaller elementary schools that have a neighboring, a school very close by in proximity that has an RN at that school, as resignations come in, hiring an LVN instead of an RN. Right now we have one LVN in the district, and so this would equate to hiring a total of 5, or actually 5 more, so it'd be a total of 6 LVNs. And so there's some pros and cons here. We want to make sure that if there's a medically fragile program, we of course want an RN at that school. If an RN's not nearby, we would not pick that elementary, but just strategically looking at places to save. And as you can see, just overall, we're kind of nickeling and diming to get to that number, but that's kind of where we're at, and we're trying to leave the campuses and the teacher staffing alone because we felt like we've already made that adjustment, and we don't want to impact that anymore at this point, so we're looking everywhere else.
Could you help me know how an LVN's going to be different than an RN in pay? I understand the licensure, but if we pay teachers, nurses, and librarians on the teacher, nurses, and librarian scale, how is it going to be different?
LVN would be a paraprofessional in a sense,
Is that
and their
legal?
hourly would,
So, but we can still say we have a nurse on campus.
yeah, well, we have an LVN on campus.
So will they be hourly?
They
Or is
would
that
be.
a contract position?
No, they would be hourly, and it would equate to about $35,000 a year.
And how are they going to be vetted?
They would be vetted through our coordinator of nursing services, and Nurse Pena would
So the same
would
as
interview.
RNs
Yes,
currently are.
and they would and Nurse Pena would supervise and oversee that whole program to make sure that they're a good fit and that we have support.
And this has nothing to do with the budget really, but there are a couple of Senate bills, one by Senator Alvarado and one by Senator, is there a Spratt or a Pratt, or I don't know, but they're both to reduce some of the restrictions our school nurses have on dispensing over-the-counter medication. And they're not really going to repeal the restriction. They're just going to allow the school districts to come up with their own policy. So instead of mommy having to come up to dispense Tylenol, the nurse can do it again like we did back in a couple of years ago before the restrictions. That would sure be a benefit to our nurses right now, not to have all these prescription bottles. So if that comes across your desk, if you need, I'm using that as another in with my representatives and senators, is I have nothing to do with finance that I'd like to talk to you about. And then, oh, by the way, let's talk about finance now.
Yes.
But that would help our nurses a great deal.
You just
Sure.
gave
And
your
our
secret
schools.
away.
It's not, it doesn't need to be a secret. You gotta hit them. When you say, I've got something to talk to you that's not about school finance, they listen. And then you can turn that corner. So anyway.
Get you in the door.
All right, I'm done. I'm sure Nurse Pena can direct you to those
Okay.
bills, but they would be beneficial to our schools.
Okay, the next item is two positions at our early learning academies. We believe we would be able to function without loss by addressing those. The library services item is, we don't have this completely ironed out, but our plan is, if we were to implement this, we would meet with Sarah Flushy and get some recommendations on what her recommendations would be if we were to restructure the library services and attempt to reduce 3 more positions in the process. And so
Go back up to ELAs.
Okay.
What positions are those? General teaching positions? Are they specialists? Are they?
yeah, I'm a little hesitant to name them at this time.
Okay.
But it's a position that's doubled up.
Leave it there.
Okay.
It has some duplication is what we're looking at.
Non-teaching.
And then with the library services, this is an area that a lot of other districts have targeted just because it's non-classroom. But at the same time, we understand the value and importance of our librarians. And so instead of expanding, so our conversation was, do we want, initially we were going to expand more campuses sharing librarians. and then we pulled back on that. And so we would like to meet with CNI, with Ms. Felucci, to get a better idea of, is there a way to reduce three positions and make sure we're meeting the needs of our campuses? Is there a place to share maybe at secondary instead? And so we're wanting more information, but the goal is, or the outcome is, to reduce by 3 more positions at the end of the day. So we'll see if that's possible or not.
Are those positions, are those librarian positions? Like
They would be.
Okay.
Yep. In some form or fashion.
What is our current number of like actual librarians in GCCISD?
Do we have that number, yes, sir, Monica? We can pull that for you.
There's,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
When you say in part-time, you mean 0.5? Yeah. So if we were to add all that up, how many total FTEs would that be? Let's say right now. Okay.
These positions, are those going to be the full-time or the part-time? The full-time? Okay.
So is there a total of 21? Is that what I heard?
But the .5s will probably go up.
That's what would happen.
Yes.
Well, that's what would happen. But the question is the formula. Are we going to do more of a feeder pattern model? At the elementary level, there's more instruction provided from the librarian. And so maybe we restructure how we staff that instead and have more sharing opportunities at the secondary. And so we're going to lean on Ms. Felucci to get her recommendation, and then
Is there
possibly
any
have something.
regulation as to who can check books out to students?
No, and right now we have our CTSs, our campus technology specialists, who are
So
supporting
that
the
can be,
librarians.
we can check out books all day, every day, if we need to.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
I think there's been a little bit of hiccups in implementation,
Well, sure.
but we do have a paraprofessional there supporting when the librarian's not there.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that one's still not finalized, because we want to be, we know any kind of change is going to have some sort of negative impact, and so we want to try to minimize those if it's possible. Some of these other items are just reducing positions, and so whenever we met with the committee, they identified certain positions throughout the district or certain departments throughout the district. And so again, what we would do here is using our attrition model is, as we have resignations, we have a position control committee that's been in place all year long. In fact, if you look at line 20, that reduced position adjustments, throughout the school year this year, we've just really tried to vet what needs to be filled and what doesn't need to be filled. And we've added some positions. We've added some SPED positions. We've added a few other positions along the way. But at the end of the day, we've reduced 92,000 when you add up the adds and the reductions. And so my point is that we've really tried to monitor position control this year, even before the deficit process. And so we would do the same with clerical staff, and then also with non-teaching district staff for number 35 and 38. Yes, ma'am.
That's what I was going to ask. What was 35 on those reductions?
Yeah, and so we haven't necessarily identified what's specific. It's 5 positions, but it would most likely, like for example, we have a. I don't want to throw out ideas because the crowd will think we're reducing it. But as we have vacancies right now, we're on a hiring hold, and so we're not allowing for non-teaching positions. We're not allowing those positions to be filled quite yet while we go through this process. And then at the end of the day, if we need to select some to reduce, we'll work with Dr. O'Brien and Executive Council to make that decision. So if it's a campus and it's a position we know we're filling. Of course, they can hire immediately for that position. So it's not a blanket hold, but it's for really non-campus positions. We're on a hiring hold.
How confident are you, Dr. Bollinger, we can address these through attrition? Because now we're fishing in different waters than we have in the last couple of years.
So
and some of these positions don't turn over as much as others.
it's true. I have a vacancy roster that shows all of our vacancies, and so I think that it wouldn't happen immediately. I think over the course of next year, we would be able to probably hit that target. If the target was 103 positions, the 48 plus the 55, I think we could do that. I think that the negative impact would be quite severe to do 103 positions. I think we would see the impact, whether it be work orders not being filled, grass growing 3 feet tall, whatever that outcome is. Just we will have a less manpower quite a bit. So I think that's what we have to consider as we're going through position by position. I think anyway. So my confidence level in actually hitting that number, I think we could do that within the next year, just because we have 4,000, we have 3,500 full-time employees. And so with that comes a lot of resignations and rehires. And so I think that we would have the resignations. I think selecting those 103 would be quite the challenge.
So just to give an example of a position per se,
Let's not
assistant chief was open for 6 months, and the assistant chief position salary was not paid for 6 months. So that would be a realization we're not showing here, but it would be an example of what he's talking about. We will realize it wherever we realize it in that cycle of that year.
And that'll offset the ones that take time to go through the attrition process. My question, though, is a lot of these, we start looking at these 55 additional positions in operations and auxiliary. I don't believe we have that many that just retire and resign on their own.
I think district-wide, it may not be just in those departments, but district-wide, I think over the course of next year, I think we'd be able to get there if we were given that task to do.
Our number of attrition each year is between 250 and 300 employees.
Teachers. Yeah,
Right.
teachers only.
And that's what I'm saying. We're fishing in different waters now.
Yeah. But we still have turnover in those departments. So.
Okay, so let's say this one more time, Dr. Bollinger. Attrition and not layoffs, correct?
That's correct.
Say that one more time nice and loud.
Attrition, not layoffs.
Thank you.
Well done.
That is correct.
We're going to do this every time.
The goal is not to get to the point where we have to lay off, and so that's why we're having to make the hard choices now.
RIF is not
Thank
on
you.
the table. I know TASB, and we work with them a lot on, I'm sorry, I lost my word. Give me a second. Staffing recommendations. Can you tell us just in the 30,000 foot range, what does that address? Is it campus? Is it, I guess I'm fishing for number of student ratio to employee.
Sure.
How do they do that?
So a few years ago, and so we pay for that study separately, and we don't do that every year. And so
Right.
I think it was 3 years ago, right when I came into this role, that study was being done. But they take comparable districts. I think it was 20 comparable districts, and then they break it down department by department. How do we look in operations compared to those districts? And they give us a median as far as the number of staff that we allocate versus the 20 other districts. They do it for police and security. They do it for C&I, for HR, for every single department. So we can see, are we 1 or 2 off, or are we 20 off? And then based off that study, we can start making moves that make a little bit more sense.
Are we making use of that study in this attrition model?
We are, and I think a lot of what you've seen over the last 2 years has directed with class size and with other areas as well. But even in like the custodial adjustment was part of that study and part of that recommendation. That study's a little outdated now, so we probably need to do it, within the next year or two.
That recruiting and retention comes into play with that study in mind, based on other districts with 24,000 kids.
Absolutely.
And you know, I don't really want to see it, I don't want to study it, but I want to know that we're using it to our advantage in more than one way.
We definitely
what I
are. We're
mean?
going to get into the details of that at the next meeting also, but our
Always
market.
that AP kid, sorry.
But our market comparisons, because of the adjustments that we've done over the last few years, we're right on the money. I mean, you know, we're in a very competitive market here on the east side of Houston, and all the changes that we've made and equity adjustments and longevity adjustments have really put us on target. So we're looking good in that area.
I want to go back to line 25 if we can for just a little bit, the white fleet policy. At our last budget briefing, I requested more clarification on that. If we're reducing it $100,000, $100,000, how much are we really spending on that? I don't believe we've been briefed on that yet. So if we can get a breakdown on that, what we're spending on and how many people it's affecting, and then also separate out white fleet being police department and everything else.
I believe Dr. Price is working on that, and I don't know if he wants to talk about that right now, but I know that it's been a topic of conversation that we've gone through. Where we got to that number, and I'm going to lean on Matt Flood a little bit on this, but the formula that we were applying that included gas expenditures, I think we have 53 white fleets, so if we were to make it a requirement where no one's allowed to drive that vehicle home, that number would get us close to $100,000. It wasn't just gas, it was gas, mileage. And
We use the IRS reimbursement rate for mileage, and we have how far they're traveling each day with it to their home and back, and then we use that mileage multiplier to figure that out. And there's going to be some reductions in who drives vehicles home, and there may even be a recommendation that we don't send vehicles home with folks and employees at all. So we're just working on it.
That's what I'm leaning towards, because there's the difference between a police officer responding directly to this call versus a maintenance person coming out to repair a pipe, and he drives an extra 5 miles to pick up his truck. And the other thing is, what does our 30-mile radius begin at? Because that's not defined anywhere I've seen. Is it?
It's from the office to their home.
Well, which building? Because a maintenance employee or police officer
FMC,
can say.
but police officers are excluded from that. Yeah. Yeah, police officers are excluded from that, yes.
I'd like to see a better breakdown on that because we're only a few years away from wear and tear on vehicles. And right now, we're not in a position to replace these vehicles, and that's a bigger picture.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that was the conclusion that we were coming to as well during the discussion.
And I've said before, and I'll say it again, I get that it's a perk of the position. However, there's a lot to be said for someone that lives in our school district, pays our taxes, and drives that vehicle to their house within our school district. I'll just leave it at that, especially in tough times. But I would like to see that report, and I'll ask for it again and again until we get it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And concerning the same thing, back to line 12, my question about vehicles and liability insurance was not so much this 30-mile radius as to, do we have too many of them? Can we park and or sell some of them at auction and get them off the insurance roster? Or what is parked and not rolling that could go away and get off the insurance roster? Have we done all that?
Dr. Price is working on that as well.
Is our insurance through TASB?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's negligible.
Yeah.
The number of vehicles, it would take a lot of vehicles to change that cost, I believe.
Well, if we're looking at 70,000 here and 80,000 there, any thousand helps.
True.
Good evening. I do have the report for you. If you would like, I can get that out to you tonight. We do have it printed up. But as far as the departments and the vehicles, the spares, we have about 2 spares per department in maintenance, grounds, and custodial. And that's because if something goes down, we have those machines. But as far as when they get old, we do get them to auction, get them off our books.
There's nothing sitting in a corner of a lot somewhere.
We do have some, but they're going to auction. They're already slated for auction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable, Dr. Price, if that's just emailed to the board, would be fine. That report.
We can do that.
We'll include it in a weekly update.
Good. The same but different. How many empty portable buildings do we have across the district?
That I do not know.
Maybe we could figure that out and get them off the roster. And I hear Cleveland is accepting donations, and that get them. Well, if they want them, they will. But we could get them off the maintenance and the insurance roster.
Well, there's a cost variable.
Mr. Foxworth, was that not good? Okay, you made a face.
Well,
Okay. I mean, I know we have buildings out there that are used as an office for a person in a portable building, and that's kind of wasteful.
So the question is, how many unused empty portables do we have? And so I think between Ms. Garcia and Dr. Price, we can get that number.
I don't even care if I know, just look into that and get it off the roster.
Okay, I think number 47.
Okay, so that brings us to line item 47, and that's reduced departmental budgets. That's a large number there. It's going to be significant. It's $1 million. I mean, when you're talking about because some budgets can't be reduced, like utilities. We can reduce the budget, but the bills are still going to come as they come, and gasoline and that sort of thing. Supplies and all the things that we buy. With our department budgets, it's going to be a tall order, but we're working diligently to do that. With that, we still, even if we do every single one of those items, 19 through 47, we're still $2.5 million short of the target to balance the budget, which would require an additional 55 positions to be reduced at $45,000 each. That's just the average salary across the board, high and low, includes everybody. So that is what it would take to balance the budget. And we'll move to the next slide here so we can kind of put it all together. I know it's a little bit busy, but I just wanted to make sure that we had the side-by-sides here so you can understand what we're working with. The blue shaded columns, that is for 25-26 budget. The green shaded columns are for 26-27. So these are out in the future, based on what ifs, and unknowns are, not going to be factored in. So, and they're hypothetical for sure. But if you look at scenario A, that to balance the budget, with the additional 55 positions as you see on line 3, that is what it would take to balance the budget in scenario A if you did not, if you did require us to go back and reduce by an additional 55 positions or additional $2.482 million. We're estimating our fund balance at the end of this fiscal year at June 30th to be $89 million. We hit it really hard in the last year because of insurance costs. We had a surprise in August on our insurance increases, and we jumped in and the board approved those supplements to keep us from having to pass those costs on to our employees. So we would be able to keep that fund balance at 6/30 of 26 at the same amount of 89 million, which puts us well within our range of fund balance policy CE local, which is 3 months reserves, 3 months expenditures, which is $66.6 million. Now, if you look at scenario B for 25-26, this is if you all direct us not to go and cut an additional 55 positions or $2.48 million. You would see we would have the $2.48 million as our deficit in line 8, revenue under expenditures. That would give us a fund balance estimated at 6/30 of 26 on line 10 there of 86.5 million. Still keeps us within our range on our expenditures required at 67.3. So those are the two options that we're going to need your direction on for 25, 26. Scenario A or scenario B. Now, the green shaded areas, this is what would be projected for next year if certain legislation does or does not pass, or, you know, somewhere, it's going to fall somewhere in there. But if scenario 1, no additional funding from the legislature. Now, that also conversely means no unfunded mandates as well, which we all know without a doubt there will probably be some. So, I mean, there always is, and we usually find out way after the fact when they're handing down the rules in the fall. So if we got no additional funding from our legislature, you can see on line 8 there, we would start out with a $12 million deficit. If you look on line 5, we would have an estimated, and it's not guaranteed, it's just estimated, transfer in from capital projects of $4 million. And I carried those same numbers just to make, you know, all things equal, so you can compare just to, you can see what the legislation does, you know, specifically in a vacuum with all things being held equal. I also factored in a 2% pay increase on line 4, which is the $4.284 million. I held revenues flat because we've been seeing slight decreases in enrollment in ADA, even though we've seen some slight increases in weights due to our population changes. It's rendered it approximately flat with our revenue year over year. So if we got no additional help from our legislature, we would start with about $12 million deficit next year. However, if House Bill, the school finance bill coming from the House, which is House Bill 2, if that were to pass in its form with no additional costs, it would bring in about $6.5 million, which would mean we would start our year off with a $5.5 million deficit. If it went up from there and we possibly got as much as, you know, a $340 increase to basic allotment, it could increase us up to $10 million. Now, there's also in the House bill, they have put $615 million towards special ed funding, additional special ed funding. So, you know, when it all shakes out, there could be, you know, a little bit more here, a little bit less there, but it's probably going to, if I had to guess, which this is probably going to not age well, but I would say by next week when the legislature does something, yes, it probably will fall somewhere in that scenario too, if I had to guess. But again, this, I mean, if there's a lot of disagreement and defensive postures by infighting in the House, they could kill one another's bills. And so a couple of sessions ago, we had that where there just wasn't a whole lot that got passed because they all were fighting and they killed one another's bills. So my crystal ball says maybe somewhere in that scenario 2 range, but again, we don't know. And that's where we would start next year. So it can go up to as much as 12. Beginning deficit with all those factors factored in there, and you know, go down to maybe a $2 million deficit. But again, it's undecided right now until the governor signs it and the bills go to conference committee and the Senate and the House fight it out. So to be continued.
Yeah. All right. 2 to 5 questions about revenue.
Yes, sir.
First of all, the $253.15 million projected revenue is based on the current M&O tax rate.
That is correct.
Without any decrease by the board.
That is correct.
And
yes, all things equal.
Every little decrease costs us $1.5 million.
Correct.
What about federal funding that's in that dollar figure? I know it's a smallish amount, but are we? We
decreased our SHARs significantly because of the clawbacks and the retroactive applications of new rules, and so we've just got a few $100,000 in SHARs now. We used to get 2.5 million.
Right. So
that's been
really
slashed.
a tiny portion of our budget anymore.
Correct,
Okay.
of the general fund budget, yes. Now,
Yeah.
however,
However,
on the federal level, if we
Well-
don't know what's going to happen with the dissolution of the Department of Education.
but even if that were to become zero, it's no longer 10% of our budget.
No,
When I
not-
first
no.
started on the board, federal funding was about 10% of our budget.
Now, standalone federal funding, yeah, it's no longer 10% of our general fund.
Okay.
Now, standalone federal funding are all of our titles, ideas,
Yeah.
all those, that's $30 million, over $30 million in grants. So if that were to go away tomorrow, we
could not sustain those programs or positions.
We could not. You are absolutely correct. So now, do we know anything?
Well, the
you know,
idea.
Let's not even talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. The idea, though, would be in the dissolution of the federal funds that it would go to the states, and the states would then have the awesome responsibility to distribute those funds to.
Yes,
That would be the
right.
hope, but
Yes. Here, let's send
That's
you
not
some
confirmed.
hand sanitizer.
yeah.
Well, thank you for listening. Yeah. I really think those were my two. I think we need to look at inside at ourselves, folks, and realize these numbers are based on us maintaining the tax rate. Now, should the property values go up again, does it really matter that we have more property value if we don't have more butts and seats?
Well, it'll offset. Even the golden pennies won't be able to offset the constant decline in ADA.
How many golden pennies do we operate on right now?
We have, I think it's 8 gold and 7 copper, I believe.
Well, I'm
so.
never going to understand copper, so I'm not even going to try. Yeah.
They
Okay.
make it where it's
want
very
it that
difficult.
way,
Yes,
right, yeah,
yes.
I know. Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so with that, if you have more questions on this, but we would like to get your feedback on, could you go back to that other slide real quick? We would like to get your feedback on the 25-26 scenario A or scenario B, which are you wanting to?
Are you scenario 1 or 2? Is that what you mean?
It's in blue. Scenario A would
okay.
be go back and.
Before I can answer that question, sorry, I'm still digesting all of this. This was the new slide to me that
Yes.
I didn't have over the weekend. So anyhow, reductions. Oh, dear God. I'm sorry.
Oh, take your time.
I lost it. Okay, let's go on. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. Let me know if you, yes, it will.
Well, at midnight tonight.
Wake
I'll
you up
send
out of
you-
a
I'll
dead
send
sleep.
you an
You'll
email.
send me a text. So,
If we hold off, all right, I'm still trying to find a way to promise a raise without putting it in the budget. Contingent, the rate, I mean, I don't know. I just don't, it's hard to decide when you don't know what the other people are doing.
we are pretty sure, based on the conversation we had with TASB, that folks are giving raises. Most of them are. They just
Yeah.
haven't announced it yet.
Yeah. You should have seen Senator Middleton's face when I said, I believe you should introduce a bill requiring the state legislature to pass their budget before school districts have to pass theirs.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, he didn't like that.
I'm sure he did.
And that is a challenge because we don't know, what additional funding, if any, is going to be
Right,
added. And so
right.
we're having to make a decision based off of the assumption that no funding is going to be added. But I will tell you this.
True. We've done this before, and last session we got nothing anyway,
Right.
and thank God we planned for it.
Yes.
And the lesson from COVID is don't use temporary money to add positions, just spend it on stuff.
Right.
Okay.
whenever possible.
All right, it's not
Absolutely.
coming back, so let's move on.
Okay.
The question that she posed to the board was this: taking into consideration the reductions in positions over the last 2 years, as Dr. Bolger referenced, do we want to continue that pathway and reduce 50 more positions, non-teaching positions, but 50 other positions, or do we want to currently leave the placeholder at 2.5 mil deficit?
Well, since I'm going to be sworn in at the next meeting, I'm going to step out and say I'm okay with a $2.428 million deficit and not cut any more positions.
I have to agree with Mr. Clem as well. And also, when we're looking at the 2% general pay increase, we've cut so much. So you have a lot on everyone, and they're doing double duty.
Yes,
You know,
everybody's taking more on.
So I would like to see that kept in and look at scenario B, and that we don't cut any more positions. That, because folks are tightening up at the bootstraps already, and they're
Right.
playing a big role. So I don't want to cut any more positions
And if
possible.
funding did become available after the budget is adopted, as Ms. Clark mentioned, you could do a budget amendment to add 1% if you wish to.
I would echo Mr. Clem and Ms. Tim's on that. And that's based on, when we look at these 55 positions, they're different than what we looked at in the previously. We were overstaffed in a lot of these positions. In my profession, I work with these people on a daily basis, and I realize that it's tough. And you're asking employees to do a lot more with a lot less people. And I just don't feel like that's a pond we could fish in. I use this as an example every time. Dr. O'Brien can take a week off, we're fine. If a custodian takes a week off at a school, we have to shut the school down. I'm just not willing to dip into
Pretty
those.
much.
I don't want to fish in that pond right now if we don't have to. With that being said, when I came on this board, our fund balance was over 100. And we are nipping away at that every year, just trying to get by until our state does what they have to do. And for those that come back and listen to this and want to know what's going on, contact your legislators. They need to hear from us. Every phone call is logged and it makes an impact.
Absolutely.
They are people too, and they don't know. We assume that they know what's going on, but until they get that phone call, that log, you have a conversation with them. I've had conversation with our legislators. Mr. Clem has, a lot of us here at this table have. They make a difference. And when they hear from the general public, not just trustees that are over here trying to balance budget, it makes a difference.
And they're not scary either.
They're not.
Some of them are quite fun to play with. I mean, talk to.
This is true for the most part. But with that being said, I would support scenario B. Fingers crossed, but we have to watch that fund balance going down. We can't continue to let it go down much longer.
Yeah, it used to be 111 million.
Right. Yep.
I remember.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I am willing to go ahead and let it reduce a little more. We value our employees. I want people to know that work for Goose Creek. We do value you. Dr. Bollinger, we're going to talk about attrition every time, and I'm going to say every employee is important. I am not up here to lay anyone off.
Yeah.
But we're getting dangerously close. So.
Yeah, that's true. $1 from everyone. And play the lotto. Hey, no, but
On your own.
right.
Yeah. So,
what about the rest of y'all?
same, okay. Mr. Martinez, yes? Okay.
And as we do the budget, I mean, as you know, as we do the budget updates on April 7th, we'll provide more information. And hopefully by May, whenever we have that compensation for approval, maybe we'll have more insight on the direction legislation's going, and that may be in our favor.
For example, if something goes from the Senate to the House, back to the governor's desk, that's a good indicator.
Yeah.
So if we have those types of actionable items between now and then, your decisions will be a little bit more palatable.
One thing I wanted to ask, out of that 2%, how much of it goes towards insurance?
We're actually going to be working on insurance, and there'll be, I think she's going to incorporate that into
The May presentation.
meeting.
You're going to get a breakdown of our insurance cost in May. our
So,
benefits update.
Hopefully our insurance won't, well, excuse me, not mine, because I'm getting it. But the insurance won't go up any higher, hopefully.
Well, it remains to be seen, but because of the increases that we experienced last year, nominal increases to premiums are probably going to happen for the foreseeable future.
So this 2%, and listen, I'm for it, but I was thinking if our insurance didn't go up, then how could we split it? In other words, give, 1% now and then 1% at another given time. Would that make any difference?
When we talk about,
Yeah.
I'm going to butt into your question. When we talk about insurance, make sure we know how many employees are actually benefiting from it.
Right.
Because if we're making a decision, pulling our hair out for 30 people on level C of insurance plan B, we don't need to worry that hard. If we're talking about 82% of our employees, that's a different story.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the 2% right now is just straight salary, isn't it?
Correct.
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that Dr. Akers and her team, they're doing a very good job of really vetting the cost month to month. They meet with the company very frequently. We're doing an audit to make sure that everyone on our insurance should be on our insurance as far as with dependents. And so there's a lot of steps we're putting in place to make sure that we can keep those costs down. Insurance is a tough business. It's gone up every single year in every insurance category. And so it's been a challenge, but I know that we put it out to market each year, starting last year, to make sure that we're getting the best bid and we're doing the fair bid process. So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, that's what my concern is. You get a 2% raise and the insurance takes up majority of it.
Right. And that's why the board jumped in and approved that subsidy to keep that from having to be passed on to employees. So thank you all for that.
But we can't keep absorbing that
We
3.5
can't.
million
Yeah,
every year.
it's not possible. And we cannot.
Every time we do that, that's just like giving another percentage point, even though it's not salary, it's
compensation.
it's a permanent compensation change.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are we still at about 50% enrollment when it comes to insurance employees?
I think it's a
About
little.
half?
Is it a little over 50?
I thought it was at 50.
Right, 50.
But I will get you the exact number.
I mean, that's
But
fine.
I thought it
We're
was
still
around
in that
50.
same ballpark.
Yeah.
We're not at 90% people taking advantage of
No,
our insurance,
no.
right? It's still just mid.
Yeah. All right, so calendar and next steps. So like Dr. Bollinger said, on April 7th, these items in yellow are board meetings, and we will approve the budget reduction plan, and we will also discuss in detail the compensation plan and the TASB study. Then you'll see on May the 6th, we'll have another board meeting, and you all will hopefully approve the compensation plan. And we'll talk about the other budgets, debt service and food service. And then on the 19th, we'll talk about some of those other funds in detail. And then if needed, on June 2nd, we could have another workshop if the board wanted to. And then on the 16th, the entire budget will be adopted that evening, and we are done.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
That
Thank you
concludes the
both.
presentation.
Great job.
Thank you.
And
There being,
everybody who is here, thank you for your input. Even though some is silent, it was here. Thank you.
We know Ms. Clark didn't do it by herself.
Right.
Definitely not. Had lots of help.
thank you both, and thank everyone. There being no further business before this board, this meeting is adjourned at 7:27. No other, before I hit the gavel with Dr. O'Brien. Now you can't ask any more questions.